Aside from your LSAT score and your GPA, your personal statement is the third most important piece of your law school application. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some tips that I have for creating a really good personal statement, and then we'll talk about some common mistakes that I see people make whenever they're drafting an initial personal statement. The first and most important consideration that you should have when creating a personal statement is you should think of the personal statement as a kind of tiebreaker. Let's imagine that you're a admissions committee. You're serving on there. You're a law professor whose part-time job is to look at law school applicants and decide whether or not someone should be admitted. Now, you're probably going to be faced with hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. So many people are going to be applying to your law school. And of course, there will be certain benchmarks that the faculty and the administration is going to look at before they actually look at your application. And those will be things like your GPA and your LSAT score. If you don't meet the medians, then it's most likely that they're not even going to look at your application. But let's say your GPA and LSAT score fall within that nice percentile where you're likely to at least get looked at. But let's say that maybe you're on the line. Let's say maybe they've reached their quota for the year and they don't feel like they want to admit anybody else. Or let's say they're going to put you on the wait list. The personal statement is an opportunity to cross the finish line. It's an opportunity to show, okay, I have all the other chops that the rest of the students have. I fall within the pack, so to speak. But here's my story. Here's my opportunity to tell you, an admissions committee, why, if you're going to take a risk, take it on me. So don't think of the personal statement as everything is riding on it. Your LSAT score and your GPA, that's where all the weight is really riding. So spending an inordinate amount of time on your personal statement at the expense of, say, studying for the LSAT is probably not the right way you want to divvy up your time. But if you feel like you're comfortable with your LSAT score and you feel like you're doing well in your classes and getting a good GPA and you're getting some exposure to the law, then maybe it's time to start thinking about that personal statement and to put some serious effort into it. Think of it, as I say, as some way to cross the finish line. It's really not about the thing that they're going to see first off. They're not going to take a first blush at your application by reading your personal statement, but rather they'll start looking at that personal statement when they want to consider the character of the students that they're bringing into the law school. So if you write it with that in mind, as kind of communicating to an admissions committee that, yeah, you really do want to take a chance on me, well, then your personal statement's going to go a long way. The other thing to consider is that your personal statement, if it's your safety school, if you feel like I'm going to for sure get into this law school, your personal statement might not be carrying a whole lot of weight. That doesn't mean that you phone it in. It just means that maybe you don't have to wow the admissions committee like you would if you were applying for your REACH school and you feel that your LSAT score and GPA aren't good enough. So writing it with the end in mind is very helpful. The second thing that you want to consider is you want to tell a story. And I don't mean you want to tell some anecdote about your life background. That's certainly one approach to telling a personal statement. But what I really mean is you're telling your personal story. And you're trying to communicate the human element to your application. Think about it like this. Law school admissions committees are seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of these applications. And for the most part, they're looking at cold, hard numbers. Every single year, more and more students apply. There's transfer students. And so from their perspective, you're really just this data point. You're just kind of sliding through the admissions committee and they're rubber stamping your admission, or they're waitlisting you, or they're denying you. So a personal statement is an opportunity to jump off the page. It's an opportunity to essentially catch the admissions committee's attention. And telling your story in a profound way is the best way to go about doing that. If you've had particular dramatic experiences in your life, lead with those. If you've overcome significant hurdles in your life, lead with those. If you've had a unique experience with the law that you feel like has changed your view as to why you want to go to law school, well, then that's a good opportunity to open up your personal statement. You're really trying to give yourself a short autobiographical window into your own life. So you don't want to go into elaborate amounts of detail. You definitely don't want to start from birth until the point at which you're applying to law school. but you do want to highlight that you are a human being and that you have really human characteristics to you. And it's also really crucial that you make sure that people understand that this is why I want to go to law school. This is what I care about. These are the things that are driving me to apply to this program. And this is why I think I will be successful in law school. So if you're hitting those major points, you're catching their attention, you're making the case for why you want to go to law school, and you're making a case as to why you're a good human being to bring into their program, well then chances are you're doing a really good job with what you're supposed to in the personal statement. Another tip that you should think about is you want to emphasize your identity. And I treat this as its own separate tip because while it may have some overlap with telling your story, it's worth mentioning this as a distinct piece for a very specific reason. Law schools more and more want to diversify their classes. Traditionally, law has been a very white male profession. If you look at most of the 20th century and prior, it was mostly a male profession, and it was most often done by white individuals. And most often those individuals came from a position of privilege and some wealth. So these days, law schools are desperately trying to diversify their entering classes. They really want to gain a wide swath of people, and so they want to identify those individuals that are most likely in underprivileged or underserved categories. So if you have unique experiences about your identity, if you come from a race that's traditionally been underprivileged, or you identify with a gender that's been traditionally discriminated against, or maybe you're LGBTQ, or maybe you have a disability that you have been dealing with your whole life and that you have overcome, or maybe you've had some military service, or maybe you've had some civil service that's changed the way you look at the world. All of those are really important pieces. Now, I want to caution you here. You don't want to go overboard. You want to be honest with who you are. There's plenty of examples in the news these days of people who are lying about their identities. They're trying to gain the upper hand, I guess, by claiming to be an identity that they are not. And you should absolutely not do that. You want to do this ethically, and you want to be honest and sincere about the kind of person you are. And you definitely don't want to look like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. If you don't come from these underserved categories, or you can't make a case that your identity is unique or diverse, well then don't stress about it. Don't bring attention to something that just isn't there. In my case, when I was applying to law school, the bottom line is I'm just like vanilla ice cream. I'm a white, straight male that came from a middle-class background. So there was really not much more I could say in my personal statement other than that I came from rural America, something that maybe not a lot of students going to GW would have been able to say. For the other individuals, maybe your identity really leaps off the page. Maybe you look like you come from a background that desperately needs more representation in the law. In which case, emphasize that and own it, and make sure that the admissions committees see it, because that's going to be valuable stuff for them. Again, these are tiebreakers. You want to emphasize, I want to come back to the very first tip that I laid out at the beginning, and that is that not any particular identity is going to automatically get you into law school. That's not what I'm saying. But it is a chance to be able to say, look, my LSAT's virtually identical to everybody else's, and my GPA looks a lot like everybody else's. But here's why my identity and my underprivileged background makes me a better candidate than, say, the person who's kind of the traditional individual. Something to think about when you're drafting your personal statement. Now, the other key thing you want to do is you want to revise, revise, revise. And I emphasize that more than anything else. You have to make sure that whatever it is that you send in a law school application is picture perfect. It needs to have no grammatical mistakes. It needs to have absolutely no spelling and typographical errors. It needs to look clean and polished. It needs to be written like somebody who has just graduated from college. It needs to be the kind of level of writing that a person will not be distracted by common mistakes. And it needs to flow and tell the story in such a way that's not going to be confusing or convoluted. If you're making a case for yourself, there needs to be reasons, and there needs to be actual stories to back up that logic that you're trying to convey. Now, you can't do that in the first draft. There's no way to get your personal statement completely perfect in the first blush. So you need to spend some time on this. Now, again, I'm not suggesting you spend days and days writing your personal statement. You may have to write it, come back to it a few weeks later and with some fresh eyes, and then revise it again. You should also reach out to other people. Your pre-law advisor could be very helpful for this, but any English professor or writing professor could be very helpful here. You can also reach out to law students that you might know to have them weigh in on this. And if you know anybody that works at a law school, they would obviously be a really great resource to reach out to. If you struggle with grammar and you struggle with your technical ability, then you really need to do the work right now to make sure that you're improving upon that. If you know that you're the type of person that struggles with writing, as I said in some of my initial videos, you really need to make that a change right now. And that needs to be reflected in your personal statement. The other reason why you want to revise over and over is because you might miss things the first round. There may be things about your experience that maybe change over time, and you may be able to approach them from a new perspective. So giving yourself that extra time to be able to go through multiple drafts, that can be very helpful in the long run. Now, last of all, what I want to talk about are some common mistakes that people make and the types of things that I see that are a little bit amateur when people are creating personal statements. These are not terribly horrible mistakes. They are not ones that are going to mean you're never going to get into law school. Really, these mistakes are problems that distract from the other four things that I've said. They are things that are potentially keeping you from breaking that tie and showing that you can leap over that finish line despite whatever LSAT score or what have you. Some of the common mistakes include things like this. It's too long. You really want to aim for about 2 pages. In fact, most law schools cap that out as a requirement. They may even have a word limit. You want to fall within those word limit and those page requirements. But even if they don't have an official requirement, you should aim for about 2 double-spaced pages, no more, and right around that amount. Anything less than that, and you're probably not telling enough of your story. Anything more than that, and you're going to start boring the committees. Most of the time when these admission committees are looking at these documents, they're really skimming and they're looking at highlights. So being able to have good, short, pithy sentences that communicate concrete ideas, that's going to mean more to you than just droning on in paragraph after paragraph. Make sure it looks organized. Make sure it's pleasing so that a person can actually read this thing, but don't drone on and on. Now, one thing I should say is if you have specific things that you do want to call out, so for example, if you feel like your grades don't accurately reflect your ability, maybe your grades later on in college were better than the ones that were earlier on. As I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, you can always include some addenda. You can attach an extra piece, a paragraph of material that basically explains some of that. So maybe you don't have to spend all of your personal statement explaining those specific pieces. But again, those addenda are very, very short, and some law schools may not even accept them. So you want to check the application process to make sure that you're doing it appropriately. But ultimately, your personal statement needs to be self-contained, and it needs to really reflect you as an individual, as opposed to all these extra details about grades, LSAT score, etc. So make sure you're aiming for that 2-page double-spaced benchmark as your guide. Another mistake that I see all the time is that you're maybe too idealistic. You're aiming for the stars, basically. You're suggesting in your personal statement that you're going to change the world and that your law degree is going to be the superpower that you need to be able to change that world. That's a classic personal statement mistake. Too often law school admissions committees are going to see those types of personal statements and they're probably going to be ignored. Why? Because everybody does it. Again, you're trying to distinguish yourself in the personal statement. You're trying to be able to reflect something unique about you. The law schools know what you're going to do with their law degree. You're going to practice law, and maybe someday you might do some more high-level, interesting things with your profession, but chances are right out of law school, you're going to practice law. So going in with this attitude that you have to sell this idea of being Wonder Woman or Superman is a little bit ridiculous, and it might come off as a little bit amateurish. Now, related to that, another common mistake that I see is that it gets a little bit too cheesy. There's a threshold here. So you want to aim for telling a good personal story, communicating your identity, making sure that you're giving a human element to yourself. But you don't want to be overly dramatic about this either. You don't want to drone on and on for 2 paragraphs about some horrific event that happened to you, even if it's something that's very deep and personal, even if it has a profound impact on you. You don't want to go overboard in terms of the dramatics. You want to be able to say, this is a thing that I have experienced. Here's why it's important to me. Here's why it impacts my law school application. And here's how it's going to make me a better person and a better lawyer. That's really all you need to do with regard to some of these more dramatic events that are in your life. If you're really telling this like some sort of a fiction story, or if you're trying to draw this out as some sort of a dramatic episode and paint this picture with words, you might be going a little bit overboard. And that's why it's important to reach out to other people to have these be read by others. You want to make sure that you're revising with the feedback from other people. And some of your closest individuals can be some of your harshest critics. So make sure you're getting their feedback as well. The last thing that is a common mistake that I see all the time in personal statements is that students become a little bit uninformed. They are somewhat ignorant of the law school process. Too often, personal statements don't really convey that you understand what law school is going to be like, and that you really don't understand what it is going to be like to be a lawyer. Now, that's not to say that you have to have everything perfect. No one really knows what it's like to be a lawyer until you start practicing it. So I don't think any admissions committee is trying to hold you to some unreasonable standard. But you don't want to say things that communicate that you really don't know what you're doing here. You want to be humble, and you want to be able to convey that you're eager to learn, and that you're eager to learn from professors that are going to make you a better lawyer. You want to acknowledge that there's some things that you still don't know, essentially. You don't want to go in and say things like, I can't wait to learn how to become Clarence Darrow, or some other figure that you might see from history that are these powerful lawyers. You don't want to suggest that you don't really understand what legal practice is like. You really just want to convey that you're a person and that you are worthy of getting a second look on those applications. So those are the common mistakes that I see, and those are my tips as to how you might handle your personal statement. Remember, keep revising and keep looking at feedback from other people, and you probably can't go wrong with your personal statement. Happy drafting.